When creating a new dress, there are always different ways to approach the designing process. Sometimes, in a moment you least expect it, an idea comes to mind, a shape that forms in your head that you get excited about turning into reality. And sometimes it starts with intention. Something that captivates your attention and longs to be turned into a dress. And then there's nothing else to do but to accept the challenge. Whenever a design falls into the second category, it involves a lot more planning compared to when the design just appears in your head. It not only takes a lot longer to actually start with a project, but you can also find me looking over thousands of pictures, switching designs a few times, and oftentimes wondering how to start. But the first step for this is to always bring everything to one place, whether it's a sketchbook, a pinboard, or in our case, today, the sponsor of this video, Milanote. Milanote is your sketchbook, organization tool and pinboard all at once. It's built for the early stages of your creative process, to help save ideas, take notes, organize and collaborate with others. The last time I showed you how I used Milanote was with this dress, but since then I used it for a lot more, like planning our wedding, for example. Today, however, we are using it to plan the Cathedral dress. To get started, Milanote offers a variety of templates, but since we're starting with a lot of visuals, I want to start fresh with a clean board, just a white background. First, I want to get all my inspiration pictures into the project. For this, there are different ways to do that. If you have saved a picture, you can either just drag it onto the board or look for the Add Image option on the left side. But you can also use the web clipper tool, which allows you to add pictures you stumble upon online for your research. First of all, let's put our main inspiration right in the middle. Here I add all the ceilings I liked a lot. Seeing them all together now, I definitely prefer the more geometrical shapes over the round ones. I also think that I want to go with this particular colorway. I also love the way how the colors go lighter towards the window, so I want to incorporate that into the dress as well. To pick the color, I can just add a color card and then pick the color from my reference image. I also looked up other dresses that played with the same inspiration. For this, I like to not only add the picture, but also note who made the dress. At this point, I really like to use the board as a place to spread out all of my inspiration pictures and scribble down whatever comes to mind. This could be done with notes, but I really enjoy how easy it is to write on the board. For this, it's also really helpful that you can work on your board from wherever you want. On your computer to see all of the detailed pictures, or your phone or tablet to take notes and have it on hand while working on your project. Now that we've got all of the inspiration pictures organized a bit, it didn't take long for me to come up with the design. You can see how I added the colorway, changing from dark to light. You can see how I oriented myself a little bit on the dresses on the left and how I tried to incorporate the dark outlines like on this beautiful chicken. I also wanted to add the windows somehow, so I added a bit more inspiration regarding that. Another cool thing is that you can add a board into a board. This way I can also add all of the organization stuff I need for this project without overcrowding the design and inspiration. Since this board is just for organization, I'm going to use one of the templates. It's simple to change them up however you need them. I mainly use the board to organize all the materials I need, because that's going to be a lot. And while Milanote works great to create a board, however creative you want it to be, you also have a lot of tools for organizing, like to-do lists, for example. Once I knew which fabric I needed, I could easily note which one I already had and which one I still needed to buy. For this, I added the links so that once I was happy with the combination of all of them and also got my fabric swatches, I could just go directly back in and order the fabrics I still needed. With all of this done, I could even share the board with clients or friends to get some feedback on the project before finally starting to work on the dress. I always love this way to plan a project because it always makes me feel like I'm really prepared and ready to start. If you want to try Milanote yourself, it is available for free with no time limit. Sign up for a free Milanote account using the link in the description and let me know which project you want to plan with it. I knew that this project would be heavy on the patterning process again, since it involves so many different parts, which is why I was glad I could at least start with the base pattern I already had. While it had a different neckline and seam placement, the pattern I drafted for the Lily of the Valley dress had a corset base whose silhouette I really liked, especially around the bust. So this was a good starting point for this project. There were two things I had to work on for now: refine the shape a little and adjust the edges, the neckline and the hem. And since I wanted to change those rather drastically, I decided to focus on this before doing all the small refining details. This meant I was able to just cut out half of the corset from my mock-up fabric, since this was only about changing shapes and not fitting anything. It would have been possible to do this directly on pattern paper, but sometimes it's really helpful to see the shape on a body to get the proportions right. So I pinned the half corset onto my mannequin and started adding extra fabric to the areas I wanted to extend. With that being added, I could sketch in the new neckline in the front and back, and then shift all the seams on the corset itself to space them out evenly. On the Lily of the Valley dress, they were more concentrated towards the front, but in order to get the pattern of the windows right, I had to have similar spacing all around the bodice. In the end, I had to find a balance between what looked symmetrical and what was actually possible with the front, back and side seams. Then I could take the half corset from the mannequin and cut all the different newly formed pattern pieces. Once everything was cut, it wasn't the sturdiest construction, held together by just a few pins, so I directly traced all pattern pieces onto paper. Here I could also smooth out some curves and wobbly lines that sometimes appear while drawing directly on a mannequin. With this new pattern drafted, I moved on to the first actual mock-up. So I got the mock-up fabric out again and this time traced all pattern pieces twice, with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. There were already so many pattern pieces, so I made sure to mark all of them. I usually give everything a number and then the side where the pattern is traced from the right side is A, where the side traced from the wrong side is B. This way I can keep an overview of everything, and this came in really handy later on in the project as well. Then it was time to sew all the different pieces together and carefully iron each seam. Working on this mock-up took so long, making sure all the corners were sharp and everything was ironed properly. Once I added a zipper to the side seam, I could finally have the first look at the first mock-up. While I was really happy with the overall look, there were a few things I wanted to change. The first one being that I wanted to make the whole thing a little tighter, especially around the waist. Next, I wanted to remove the center front seam at the bottom, and finally I had to add the additional arch pattern at the bottom panels. So I grabbed the pattern again and refined it by working directly on the mannequin. This way I was able to see exactly what I wanted to change, especially with all of the smaller adjustments. And after the pattern was done, I could sew yet another mock-up, this time made from even more pattern pieces. For this mock-up I even had to expand my pattern marking system a little bit to make sure not to confuse all the extra pattern pieces I added. And I promise there is a reason I didn't make all of the lower pattern pieces the same size. I'll explain it once we focus on those pieces a little bit more. And as expected, sewing this mock-up took even longer than the one before. The mock-up turned out exactly as I wanted, a bit tighter and with all of the extra pieces in place, even though it looked a little too tight on the mannequin. So now I only had to do the tiniest bit of refining, where a curve was too prominent or too shallow, for example, finalize the shape of the neckline, and level out the bottom of the pattern pieces. Those small changes had to be transferred onto the pattern by once again using the mockup as a guide to draw over everything. And then after starting with a different pattern, creating a new one from it, and finally 2 mockups later, we were ready to start with the dress. So the pattern is done now. I could have probably made another mockup, which would have been helpful, but I really want to continue with the dress. I really wanted to start on the actual fabrics and see how it comes together. And I think I'm at a point where this is okay. To be 100% sure, I could have made another mockup, but I don't think that's really necessary. So I will now continue with the dress. And I'm also really excited to try out the color gradient and to see how I can achieve this with the fabrics I ordered. I couldn't get quite the fabric I wanted because the tulle I usually order didn't have the black version of it. So I had to improvise a little bit and got a more sturdier tulle and also some kind of netting because I couldn't get a tulle that had the same stiffness as the one I wanted. So I have to experiment a little bit, and I really want to do this now. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this color gradient comes together, and I think it's totally fine to start with that now since we have the pattern done. So let's do this. The first thing to do was to get out all of the different materials and check how I would be able to combine them. I had to achieve 4 different stages of brightness by layering the 3 fabrics I had. So I started with the base of black tulle and then layered different amounts of beige tulle and black netting on top of it until I was happy with the color gradient. To not get confused later or lose some of the flimsy swatches, I added them onto a card and wrote down the exact way I wanted to do the layering for each step. This proved itself really handy over the course of the project, since working on the next steps would take forever and there was no way I could have remembered all of this. Maybe I seem a bit too thorough with all the marking and organizing while working on this project, but doing this helps so much with not getting overwhelmed. When a project takes long, it is always helpful to treat your future self as if you were really dumb, because once you're finally able to work on something weeks later, chances are high you've forgotten a lot of the things you had in mind while planning. Writing down and marking everything helps a lot to prevent that, which makes a long project much more enjoyable. So now let's get back to making some progress. The first layer I wanted to prepare was the second one. Since these are the largest pattern pieces, I wanted to get them out of the way to make sure I had enough fabric for everything. So I prepared large batches of the fabric and layered them in the right order. This step had to be done almost in slow motion because all of the different types of tulle moved so much on top of each other. I also had to add a dark border to the pattern pieces in preparation so they would be more visible through the fabric. Once I pinned the piece in place and trapped it underneath the fabric, I started to baste it onto the tulle. This way I not only secured all the layers together, but also had precise marking at the same time that wouldn't rub off or worse, couldn't be removed once everything was sewn. This way I worked my way around all the main pattern pieces. For the skirt parts, I just extended the base to 115 centimeters and added a width of 1 centimeter down to the hem. Once I had the technique down, this went really smoothly and I could relax a little while working on all the pieces. After the big pieces were out of the way, I could work on the other layers. For each layer I prepared the right tool order and then traced the pieces the same way I did with the previous ones. With layers 3 and 4 I had to be extra careful not to confuse them. It would probably have been possible to have all those pattern pieces at the bottom be the same size, but I realized making them slightly different made them look more similar, since they would all curve differently around the body. This meant now I had to make sure to not confuse 2 times 6 almost identical pattern pieces. So with every layer that was traced and cut, I made sure to label it properly. So I'm finally done with the basting. It took me 4 days to baste everything, and if you want to, you can guess how many meters it was in total. I actually had to baste over 45 meters, which I guess is a lot. I don't know actually. Well, I spent a few days on it, so it was a lot of work, but it's sometimes so confusing if you don't have a comparison if what you do is a lot or not, or if it's completely unnecessary or not. That's at least what I asked myself a lot while doing all of this. And it's also so interesting to see that I've spent so many days, like literal days, on working on this project without even sewing the first seam. So there is so much that goes into a dress that you can't see when you see the dress. You may be able to tell that a dress was a lot of work if it has a big tulle skirt, for example. So you know it has a lot of layers that had to be cut. But something like this, when it comes to basting, you don't see it because it gets taken out before the dress is done. So a lot of times, a lot of work is really invisible once the dress is done. And so I'm really glad I have the chance to show you the work that goes into a dress like that. Well, at least for me. There are probably ways to do it differently, like maybe pinning, for example, or drawing onto it. But at least in this case, with using different types of tulle and netting that all had different kinds of stretch and sturdiness to it, it was really helpful. And I think it will do a lot to make the dress look neat in the end. And so I don't know, would there have been a better way to do it? Guess I'll never know because I basted over 45 meters. But since I really enjoy basting and I think it's a task that really calms my mind, I didn't really mind. So now you may think, oh, the basting is done, we can start with the dress. Well, no. Because before I'm actually able to assemble the dress, I have to embroider, I don't know what this is called, the last layers of the dress. Like, we prepared them earlier, but now I have to add all of those swirls onto it that are on the top of the windows. I haven't come up with the design yet. That's the next step to do. And then this design will be added by using the souttage band on top of it. And we have 8 of those pattern pieces. So this will be a lot of work again. But I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really curious with how it will turn out. Like I said, I haven't drawn any sketches yet, so I have no idea how this will look at the end of the day. The next step was to come up with a design that looked like an old cathedral window, but was still possible to form using the souttage band. I settled on a simpler design with a few key elements, also keeping in mind that I had to replicate this several times without going insane. As a last step, I made sure it not only worked in the size I wanted, but that it was also possible to drape with the band without any cuts other than the start and finish. Now comes the part where I improvised a little bit. I somehow had to create a sturdy base so that it would be easy to attach the band and still free enough to sew without the table being in the way. I hadn't really thought about this beforehand, which meant I now had to come up with something on the spot. So in the end, I grabbed parts of an old cupboard, wrapped them in cotton twill tape and covered everything with some leftover silk chiffon to make my very first embroidery frame. I got the first one done. In this case, I thought I could try how it works before filming anything, because I wasn't too sure if this technique would work with this design. I also didn't know if it would work with this makeshift embroidery frame. It worked better than expected. It still doesn't work perfectly. Like, there's still not enough tension to really like be stiff, so it's still a little wobbly, but it's enough to work. I'm super proud of it. It looks way better than expected. When planning this project, I thought about it a lot, how I want to do those windows, and I wanted it to be a little more three-dimensional, meaning I wanted it to stand out a little bit more, so that it really looks like this construction on its own and not like it's just added to a surface. And I think I really did that. I took the time, and it took me 1.5 hours to make one. Like, remember, I still have to make 7 of them. I think the time is alright. It seems like each of those pieces takes roughly half an hour, which makes sense. I'm wondering if I'll get faster when doing more, because obviously I had to figure out how it works first. I still see some room for improvement. Like, for example, I want it to be as symmetrical as possible, which I know is not like we won't get there 100%. But for example, at the place where I have to overlap the band, where it crosses itself, I want both sides to be mirrored. So I think at the last piece, I have to pull it under and not lay it over it. Otherwise, this worked really great. And it's so much fun to make it. I really like seeing it come together. So I'm really looking forward to making the other 7. Maybe not the other 7, maybe like looking forward to making 2 or 3 more. And then we'll just have to make the other ones as well. But I'm really looking forward to making more of those. It's a lot of fun. I really like taking time on details. And I'm so glad I can do this with this piece. After the first one was done, I continued with the rest of the window pieces. I always had room for more than one on the big embroidery frame, so I worked on 2 or 3 before I had to redo the embroidery base. With the frame being bigger, I could also add some weight to one side and have the other side hanging over the edge of the table, making it really easy to access everything. With every time I added new chiffon to the base, I got better at getting even tension, and so each piece got a little easier in the end. If you are more advanced at embroidery like this than I am, my apologies if this is difficult to watch. And I appreciate every tip you might have for me. But honestly, while working, I was really happy with the difficulty of the design I came up with, and I was so happy seeing all of the pieces coming together and matching so nicely, even though all of them are slightly different in shape and size. I've worked with souttage before, but the combination of the small pattern and the delicate fabric made this so much more difficult. I got all of them done. It took me 2 work days and it's quite late now. Like I predicted, I think the fun of this task peaked at the 2nd or 3rd piece, and afterwards it was just doing the other ones as well. But I'm really happy with how they turned out. I really like the look of them. I'm so looking forward to finally assembling the dress. But this has to wait until tomorrow. The next task was about organizing everything again. Now with all the window pieces done, I had to be even more careful not to accidentally swap any pieces. This was also the moment I noticed I had made 2 extra pieces, because it didn't cross my mind even once that I would only need 1 center front and 1 center back piece. And now, since finally everything was prepared, days after starting the project, I wanted to lay out all the pieces. This was also the moment I could look at the color gradient properly for the first time and see if what I planned out on a small scale would actually work on a larger one as well. Seeing this together made me so happy, and you can probably relate that at this moment I felt really proud of what I had done so far, even without having sewn anything together at this point. Everything you see here was sewn by hand, which, saying it out loud, feels crazy. After all of this was done, it was now finally time to assemble the outside of the dress. I started with the bottom pieces because they had to be finished before adding the bodice pieces. After each seam, I could remove a bit of the basting, which was a good indicator to see if I had sewn precisely. The basting was done just slightly inside of the marking, so once I sewed just outside of the basting line, everything was sewn correctly and I could just pull out the basting thread. Once each seam was sewn and pressed with the basting removed, I top stitched each piece and then cut away the seam allowance as close as possible. The top stitch will later be hidden under more of the souttage band to round off the shape of the windows. After all of the bodice pieces were added together, it was time to tackle the main bodice parts. Those were a nightmare to work with because they acted like Velcro and held onto each other like mad. But once everything was organized a bit better, I was able to slowly add 2 pieces together at a time and directly add the matching window part to the bottom. I had to do it this way because I could only add the boning once the bottom was closed. So this was the order I had to add all the pieces together. I sewed the pieces together the same way I did on the bottom pieces, top stitching each seam allowance and then trimming it away as short as possible before adding the boning on top of that. This way everything had roughly the same width and therefore created a really dark seam which worked great with the souttage band on the other seams. Here as well I had to remove all the basting thread, which honestly hurt just a little bit thinking about how long it took to add it. The most annoying part was probably sewing all the floor length strips and trimming the seam allowance there. But on the other hand, having everything look neat after giving each piece a final press was really satisfying. And just like that, the whole dress was slowly coming together, and I could see the idea I wasn't so sure would work finally coming to life. With the front and back done, I could add the zipper to the side seam. I know that theoretically there are rules on which side it belongs on, but I always get this confused, and to be honest, I don't really care. Being left-handed, everything like this is always the wrong way for me anyway. Since I wanted to match the seam to the other ones, I could just top stitch the zipper as well, which made it really easy to add. And there was only a tiny bit of collateral damage in the process. Then one last seam had to be closed before the biggest part of this project was finally done. Next up, I wanted to tackle the inside dress. I wasn't sure at this point whether I wanted to add the skirt to the underdress or to the outside, so I decided to get everything done up until that point to have a better idea of how to do it. The base dress was made out of a simple skin-toned lining that had some stretch to it. For the pattern, I just elongated the base pattern and cut it out floor length. Compared to the outside, this was done so fast and I could already continue with the skirt. I still wasn't too sure how I wanted to tackle this, but I wanted the skirt to directly flow out from the base of the window pieces, so I had to at least attach a little bit of the tulle there. That's why I decided to cut just one layer of the tulle in the right length, add a big gathering stitch to the top, and then add it directly to the inside of the window pieces. I had to do this 6 times to add the tulle all around the dress before securing it directly on the basting line of the window pieces. Then I could cut out all of the half circles at the base to reveal the actual look for the first time. Here I'll also add some of the souttage band, so I wasn't too concerned about seeing the seam. As a last step to finish the skirt, I sewed the light tulle onto the dark strips that were coming down from the top pieces to close the skirt all around. Now I wanted to add a bit more volume to the skirt without weighting the top down too much, which is why I decided to add it to the base dress. So I marked the line where I wanted to add the tulle, cut it out to the right length and added gathering stitches again. Then I pinned it evenly to the base dress, making sure to stay on the marked and gather it evenly. After the skirt, I tackled the neckline. Here I used the basting as a guide and top stitched the seam allowance down to create a dark outline. Then I added the lining dress into the tulle bodice, making sure to use the seam between the first and second layer as the guide. Now it was time for a lot of hand sewing again. As a last step, I had to add the missing souttage band to the base and top of the window pieces. Since I couldn't lay it flat at this point, I had to do it with the dress on the mannequin. This took some time as well, but felt really rewarding because it not only reminded me of how the project started, but also brought everything together in the end. So the dress is done. I hope you liked the reveal. We were able to film it in an old cloister and the people over there were so kind and it was so much fun to film there. It had such a nice mood and I think the dress fitted really well into the setting and it was just a very nice experience to be there. So I hope you could see that in the video. Let's talk about the dress. Like I said in the beginning of the video, there are always 2 kinds of ways a project starts for me. The first one is an idea that just strikes whenever it wants, most of the time in a situation where I don't really need it. Of course, sometimes stuff changes, but most of the time when an idea strikes like that for me, I already know how the dress will turn out in the end. In this case, it was different. I saw a lot of those cathedral ceilings or church ceilings and thought, I really want to turn it into a dress. So it was more of a challenge to achieve that. And the dress itself was not really about making a beautiful dress, but the challenge of turning the inspiration into something wearable and making it possible that you can still see where the initial idea came from. And I think I achieved that. I'm really happy with the outcome. I think you can clearly see the inspiration for the windows, for the color that gets darker, the further you're away from the light sources. I really like the geometrical shape of the dress. And I think that once I've seen the dress in a setting that inspired it, everything came together and it really matched. And I'm really, really proud of it. Looking at the dress now, I would have loved to do even more of this embroidery and embellishment of the dress. I think some of the inspiration pictures I've shown show clearly that some of those ceilings are very clear and just the structure itself. A lot of them are really embellished. And I think I just did enough, but it could have been more on the dress. But this would have taken me so long. I already had to work like 2 weeks more on the dress than I planned. And I really mean like weeks of work, which I'm really glad worked out in the end. But this would have taken me forever. You have probably seen how long it took in the video. And so the dress is done. It looks like it does. And I think I can really be proud of how it looks and how it came together and how much work I put into it and also how much I've learned while working on it. So I think overall I can really count this as a success. What do you think? Can you see the initial inspiration in the dress? Do you think I could achieve that it sort of looks like a cathedral or church ceiling? Or do you think I should have done something different to achieve that? I'm really curious about what you think, because when it comes to dresses like this with a very specific starting point, the end result is something you can talk about more than compared to when a dress is just a nice design. So I'm really curious about your opinion on it. I hope you enjoyed the process of making it. I hope you enjoyed seeing me struggle a little bit, and I hope I see you in the next video again. I also want to thank Milanote for sponsoring today's video, and also want to thank them for giving me the time I needed to finish the dress. I really enjoyed working with Milanote on this project because it helped me a lot to really focus all my thoughts and organize them. And I think it had a huge part in how the dress turned out in the end. So if you want to use Milanote yourself, click the link in the description and let me know what you're using it for. If you watched this far, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. This always helps a lot, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Bye!